Welcome to the Liz McMullen Show, episode 84. I'm welcoming back a very beloved and wonderful and heartwarming author, Karelia Stetz-Waters. I'm so happy to have you back.
Thank you so much for having me, Liz. It's great to chat with you again.
Yay! I really loved Forgive Me If I've Told You This Before, and I was just... it really took me in, and I was like, I'm a teenager again. In the time frame, it was also, I was a little bit, I guess, age-wise, a little bit different than the characters, but it was very close to when I was in high school, and I found it utterly relatable. And I wrestled you to the floor when I found out you were a Lambda Award finalist for the YA category. And I said, Karelia, would you please be on my show and talk about your fantabulous book? And you, like the princess that you are, you took your wand out, and magically you're here.
You're too kind, too kind. Thank you. Always a pleasure to be on the show.
So tell me a little bit about why you decided to write a YA novel, or did it just start as a story and then happen to be a YA novel?
It really just started as a story. Forgive Me If I Told You This Before takes place in the early 90s in Oregon, which was a time when there was a lot of anti-gay political action in Oregon. There's a great documentary on it. It was a very violent time. People were killed. The pro-gay campaign offices were ransacked. People's trailers were shot up. In the Capitol, a gay household was firebombed, killed. And that was the year I came out, 1992. The year of Ballot Measure 9 was the year I came out. I was 17. And so in many ways, Forgive Me If I've Told You This Before is my life story recast through a fictional lens. So I like to tell people that it's my life if I'd actually been cool. So if I had said all the things I thought about saying and done all the things I wanted to do and been the person I really was inside, that would be Trina Hoffman, the protagonist of Forgive Me.
When I was reading it, I was very conscious of how, she had a very rich internal life, and one of the gifts in some forms of fiction is when the viewpoint character is either the strong, silent type that doesn't say things, or the incredibly shy type that doesn't say things. And just because somebody is not speaking everything that is on their mind, that doesn't mean their internal world is like a desert, And I just find it really rewarding to read a story like this one where Trina, I got to see, how she saw the world, what she wished she could say, and what her motivations were, and how she navigated starting high school. And I was like, this is really cool, because I think the best thing that a book can do is make somebody visible. And for shy or introverted folks, having books written from their point of view makes that visible as well.
I think that's really true, and I also think that every teenager is shy in their own way. The most outgoing cheerleader still has an inner life that she probably isn't sharing with her friends and family. I think it's a very private age, perhaps because young people don't always have the vocabulary to talk about their inner life, or maybe just because their inner lives are so intense. They're going through so many things for the very first time in their life. Research shows that we remember more details from about ages 15 to 20 than any other time period in our lives. You can ask me about historical events, makes and models of cars. I will always, till I'm 100 years old, I will remember more from that formative period of adolescence than at any other time. So I think all teenagers have this intense, passionate, private life that they so long to share and so long to see expressed in literature. And I think this book does justice to that. I really believe that adolescents have an ability to see the complexity in their own lives, and I wanted to reflect that back to them.
And, the other thing that I liked about your book was how layered it felt. I could see a 10-year-old reading it. I could see somebody in high school or college. But I also could see somebody my age, I'm 38, enjoying it and finding something that they can identify with it. And not like we can take a little magnifying glass and ask you how magically and intuitively you did it all. But I liked that the language was such that it could hook so many different age groups. And go ahead.
Yeah, I think we sell teenagers short. This story is related, so go there with me. When I was maybe 14 or 15, I got an anthology of short stories by an Egyptian woman whose last name is Sadawe. And I was somehow failed to realize that they were short stories. I thought it was a novel. And at 14, I read the whole thing, wondering why the entire setting, scene, characters, and everything changed with every chapter. But I finished it, and I was like, yeah, that was pretty good. I like that. And I had this openness towards literature, whereas now, as a writer and a professor, if I had a novel that was that fragmented, I would say, this is just some new age experiment, I'd toss it out. But I think teenagers are actually quite open to complexity, to depth of story, even to length. I mean, look at how many kids love the Harry Potter series. I can't get through them. That is too many wizards. They're too long. But, they're 10-year-old kids who will pour through every page 100, and read it 2 or 3 times. So I think I never wanted to dumb down anything for a young audience. I think as soon as a child is old enough to read this story, they're old enough to start wrestling with it.
Mm-hmm. What's also interesting is that you can read a book at different points in your life and have different experiences with it. And there are a few things that pop in my head. Like, I may not remember the facts of things that you remember from that time range, 15 to 20, but I do remember the things that I read. And I loved The Lord of the Rings. I read it in almost, spending my entire days, this was during the summer, several days, all day long, reading this book. And I loved it. I loved the character. I found Aragorn very inspiring and what I considered, the prototype for the best type of leader. And I loved it. And then years later, when I was in my early 30s, I was tutoring this boy, and he had a very hard time writing. So I thought if I could enrich his mind with all these kind of words, it'll kind of prime the pump and whatnot. And so I brought him this book, and I had him reading it, and I was reading it myself, and I read it, and I was like, I can't get through this thing. I can't get through this thing at all. I don't feel as connected to it, and there was another series, and this was popular fiction, and it was John Sandford's Prey series. Each book has Prey in the title. And it traces the career of Lucas Davenport, who is, a dashing but rugged detective who happens to have this really successful tech business that, gives him really sweet cars. Anyway, so I remember feeling, wow, these plots are so rich. These characters are amazing. And when I read them, I was in the 15 to 18 range, and I was like, this is amazing stuff. And then I read it, I'm like, oh my God, this is so not awesome. I was like, this is so, I don't know, bubblegum. And it was not nearly as smart as I thought it was. And we all have these different experiences. It's not like that I'm uber smart now, but what is attractive to me, what is important to me, what core values are, what appeals to me is going to be very different in the tween to early adult years than it's going to be as a middle-aged woman.
When I think about my teenage years, I was a very open-minded reader. I would read everything from very poor quality to very great quality with a equal enjoyment, whereas now I'm always holding books up to a certain yardstick. Did they meet the requirements of the genre? How is the metaphor usage? I love writing for young people because I think they are they're the best readers. And when something grabs them, it's really going to grab them. With that said, I actually intended, forgive me as if I've told you this before, as an adult novel. That was my first inclination. It was an adult novel about a young person. And it was actually my publisher who said, you've got a gold mine here. If you've got a novel about a teenager, you've got to market it as YA, because YA, those are novels that people read. That was the definition they gave us.
Yeah, I got into it. I was like, oh my God, I remember this angst. And I also remembered being on the outside of things. I was always on the outside of things from... up until, I guess, my mid-20s, I was always I joked that I was the electron in my other friends' lives. Like, they were at the nucleus, they were, the most popular kids, and I'd be, like, floating around, and I'd know a lot of popular kids, but I was never one. So when I was reading it, I was like, oh, going to the smoking section, that's something I would have done. Not necessarily to smoke, but, like, she asked, and there are all these really interesting people in the smoking section, and this cross-section of high school life, and it just changed her world from it being her and her bestie kind of snarkily experiencing life, or, her friend was snarky, she was appreciative. And it changed the trajectory of who she was. And one of the things that I don't think it's a spoiler, I'll try and be as vague as possible. But there was a point where Trinu had a decision to make, a very big decision about her life and her body. And she said, I think if she had gotten the best kitten, that she might have made, like her friend might have made a different decision about the same thing. And it was about her finding this cat who happened to be pregnant, and her parents let her bring the cat home and then let her keep one kitten. And she felt that she was nurtured in a certain way that made her have just enough self-esteem not to make a certain decision. That I'm like, I'm so glad you didn't do that. That was going to be gross.
Sometimes people ask me if my parents were as cool as the parents in Forgive Me, because Trinu's parents are very smart and compassionate and enlightened. And I tell people, the parents in the book really are my parents. Aww. There's one scene that's fictionalized. But besides that, the parents really are very, very, very much my own parents. And I wanted to give people a narrative in which the parents are good people and they accept their gay daughter, and they're not flaming liberals, they're not crazy hippies. It's I don't play this out in the book so much, but it would be a challenge in that era for a parent in a church community to support their gay child. And my parents did, and Trinu's parents did. And I really wanted to show that, and also show what a huge difference it makes. And I don't think you're giving too much away. I'll spoil it for folks. They can mute their audio if they want. That Trinu decides not to have sex with this older man that she's been kind of pushed towards by her friend, and the two things that stop her are her parents' love and the fact that she's seen a beautiful girl. And I wanted people to have that scene where they see the power of the parents' love, and also the really powerful and transformative possibilities of lesbianism for young women. When my wife and I look at our friends' daughters, we often say, oh, I hope she's a lesbian. Because there are some really good men out there, and seeing as probably the majority of my friends are guys, I know that heart and soul. But there are also a lot of pitfalls for young women. Pregnancy, STDs, domestic violence. If she doesn't pick the right woman, she can be in trouble. And lesbianism was a saving grace for me.
Deirdre's the name of the woman, correct?
Deirdre is the name of the woman that Trinu loves from afar.
And the reason why I bring her up, which is, you know, there is a parallel in my own life. When I was at Mount Holyoke, most of the classes were small. You know, you'd have maybe a dozen, less than 20 in a class. And then there were a few classes taught by Jean Grosholtz, who was this amazing feminist. She was so badass. She had to have been in her 70s, and she never wore a bra, and she always wore political t-shirts, and each day she wore a different shirt. They were all random. And I was like, you are a badass. You come to class, you have all these eclectic t-shirts, and her classes were so popular that they were held in, you know, don't laugh, Hooker Auditorium. And so there were at least 100 or more kids in there. And there was this girl, her name is Una Leff, O-O-N-A. And I believe she might have been Eastern European. I do have a thing for that. And she had this crushed red velvet lipstick, and she had pale skin and dark black hair, and she dressed in a very kind of, I don't know, goth, but she had that kind of artistic thing going on. And whenever she'd walk around, I swear it was like, not like Disney, but, you know, where somebody seems to have like a haze or a glow about them when they're like walking down the... She had that, and I had the biggest crush on her. And like the joke was with my friends who I'd be sitting with, and my one friend would go, okay, where is she? She's in the upper left at the end of
you know, and the funny thing is, I bet all those women who we have admired from afar, I wonder if they even know.
I don't.
The girl who Deidre's doppelganger in real life, she probably has no idea. She was probably feeling plain and ugly those days that I watched her from afar and wondered, you know, what it would be like to talk to her.
She was just, you know, she was an FP, which is a Francis Perkins Scholar, which in the very PC is called Students of a Non-Traditional Age, which meant that they weren't like 16 or 17 to 21. And so she was exotically 26 when I was 18.
So old, so mature.
She was so sophisticated. And she just had this impact on me. And what's interesting is I didn't actually realize I liked girls until that year. I had that crush on her, and then I was in Haight-Ashbury with a friend of mine who was showing me around, like she lived in the neighborhood. And she had been my, what's it called? We have this thing called elving, where to help kids get over their homesickness for the first month, somebody is assigned, a sophomore is assigned to a firstie who doesn't know who they are. And the sophomore puts up posters and leaves candy and treats and special stuff, something every day, not expensive, but to make them feel less homesick. And so my little Alfie, you know, the one I had taken care of, she invited me to her home, and she was straight. And the reason why I say that is that I went to Haight-Ashbury with her, and we went into this consignment clothing shop, of course. And the girl who was working there had punk rock hair. She had like, you know, orange and red, and it was kind of chunky and short, and she had this amazing, I don't know, eclectic outfit on, and I was thrown over. Like I am, and I tell people, I was like, man, if I had, because like, you know, if you're in Northern California or in some parts of California, if you don't have a car, you don't have a prayer. You know, I was like, I would have asked her out if I didn't have to rely on my younger and wonderful companion. I was like, I can't make her do that. I was like, I would have so asked her out. And so I've always had this fetish for punk rock girls like Una Leff and whatnot. And in my first YA novel, Lilith is a punk rock girl. So I finally get that character in there. But it had such an impact, and even though my life looked different than that, and I didn't actually get into like the rock scene and whatnot, those were my watershed moments. And so when I read yours, I was like, yes, I totally know what that felt like.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you felt you learned about yourself and your family as you were writing? Because you said it's kind of like a fictionalized biography in some ways. Like, what are some things that you learned about yourself, and what are some things that became more apparent as an adult as you were writing this?
One thing that really stood out to me that my editors helped me see was the importance of the history of Ballot Measure 9. When I first wrote the book, I really downplayed the anti-gay politicking in Oregon at the time, because I'm a pretty cheerful person, and I just brushed it under the carpet, and yeah, that was life, and every gay boy I knew in high school was beat up at least once, and I didn't know any other lesbians under the age of 70, and just kind of took that as life as usual. And my editors at Ooligan Press said, you've got to play up the history so that your young readers know what the stakes were. A lot of them are going to think the issue is gay marriage. And at that point, it wasn't gay marriage. It was whether or not gays could hold state-funded jobs like the community college teaching job I have now. Whether or not, it would be one of the things Ballot Measure 9 required, had it passed, was that every public school teach the evils of homosexuality, and that it be classed with pedophilia, bestiality, and necrophilia. So it was really, civil rights at a very basic level that we were fighting for. And I am so proud of the book now because it tackles those issues and because it shares that history. Before, it was good, but it was just my story, or a story similar to mine. Now that story belongs to every gay person in America. Whether or not they lived in Oregon, that kind of battle has been fought in every state, and continues to be fought. In some, I've gotten several reviews and emails from people who said, Oregon in the 90s sounds like my state today, or my very first review on Amazon came from a man in France who I've been corresponding with since then, who is very concerned about the homophobia and anti-feminist movement in France right now. And so he is seeing in France today some of what I saw in Oregon in the 90s. And so the story is everyone's, and I hope that everyone who reads it will know that in the end, good will win out. No matter how hard it seems right now, good and tolerance and love really are stronger.
When you take kind of a temperature of like emotion, when I think about some things in my when I was finishing college and shortly after I graduated from college, and like the Tina Brandon story, which was about a transgender male that upon being discovered as such was horribly raped, and then eventually, because she went to the cops, those guys went after her and murdered her friend, and somebody who was just visiting. And there's a movie called Boys Don't Cry where Hilary Swank, she got the Academy Award for playing that role. And then there was Matthew Shepard.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking.
And the story, the real story is that there were kids who saw that Matthew had money and they didn't have any money, so they were kind of pretending to be gay to get closer to him and potentially, just can't remember what the word for it is, but they were going to shake him down pretty much and just get the money. And then it went to this ugly place that it went beyond jealousy and wanting the money to they tied him up and beat him to death. Almost to death. He ended up dying there. And there are photographs of where that had been. And in one documentary, they go, I just want you to know that if you go 15 yards to the left, that's civilization. When they took the photographs, and a lot of documentary looks at the place where he died, they're like, oh, this is in the sticks, it's, in the middle of nowhere, when it really wasn't. It wasn't that far away. And so those kind of things stuck in my head and what I experienced. And now, watching the news for about a year, I was like, go us, look at all the, marriage rights initiatives, and things are going so well, and it's so wonderful. And then all of these really horrifying political things are happening, like with feminism, like people trying to dial back the clock, and like places like Hobby Lobby not wanting to finance birth control, but they'll finance Viagra and Cialis. And then most recently and bizarrely, this the initiative, is it Indiana, where the pizzeria person said, "Oh, we don't want to cater a gay wedding," and I'm just like, what gay wedding is going to be catered by a pizzeria? Not for you pizza lovers. And look, I'm from Jersey. I love me some pizza, but it never would have occurred to me. And they got a GoFundMe site, and they've raised almost $1 million to give to them.
You know, it's distressing, and I hope that we are just seeing some pushback, because we have made so many encouraging movements in the direction of gay rights. One of the other things I hope that, forgive me if I've told you this before, shares with readers, is that there are some real beautiful moments even in those difficult struggles. And I wrote a blog for Powell's Bookstore a while back, which is it is the largest independent bookstore in the world, based here in Oregon. A little promo for them. And wrote a blog for them where I talked about the sex scenes in Forgive Me. And one of the things that I wanted to convey, which is maybe a little controversial for YA literature, is, first of all, I wanted the sex scenes in there. And second of all, it was exciting having lesbian sex in the 90s as a teenager, and it had nothing to do with like the physicality of it, because teenagers are all clumsy and hopeless in that regard. But committing that act under that umbrella of political oppression was enormously exciting. That was a moments that defined my life and who I am, and nobody's happy hearing that, because you want to say everything about that time is wrong and bad, and we're 100% glad that it's over. And I am, and I don't wish that kind of oppression on anyone. But for those people who are going through it now, I want them to hold on to those powerful moments when you're so alive because you know what you're fighting for. Maybe soldiers feel that sometimes, that you're on the forefront of a battle and you just might win. That was truly an exhilarating part of the 90s for me, even though it was tragic what was going on in Oregon at the time.
Non sequitur. But
I got deep there. I got too deep. Like
no, I'm not even going to lighten it up in the least. When I was in a particular class recently, and somebody told me that Hooligan Press is a very specific type of press, and that they only publish pieces that are in the Pacific Northwest. Is that true, or?
That's correct. They focus on the Pacific Northwest. They look for minority voices, but that doesn't necessarily mean just gays and lesbians and racial minorities. I know they've published a book by a returning veteran, a book by a Jewish woman, my book. But yeah, it's a teaching press. I think it's one of 8 in the country. So it's run by the Portland State University Masters in Publishing program. And if I can just pitch them, they're pretty amazing. If anyone was looking to hire someone in that profession, their graduates are phenomenal. And if there's anyone out there, and I tell my students this, if you love literature and you love language, but you also want to eat, so you know that getting a PhD in English may not be the right choice for you, the Masters in Publishing program has a really good job placement history. It's pretty amazing, pretty dynamic program. But yeah, they do publish exclusively Pacific Northwest voices.
I think that's neat. Like there's like the double-edged sword of the niche. That it winnows it down to like a smaller target audience. But at the same time, it also gives a very strong flavor to their group of authors and their books. I know there's other presses that only published books about Appalachia. And Sapphire publishes lesbian fiction. But I thought it was kind of neat. I was like, well, I don't know anything about where Karelia lives. You know?
I live in the grass seed capital of the world.
I know. What is
If you have a lawn, we grew it.
Okay. It's like, what does grass seed mean? Because in my head, as I was reading it, I'm like, are there just bunches of seeds everywhere? Or does the grass actually grow? Like, I don't understand.
Grass grows everywhere, except in my lawn. My lawn is like a dead zone. But yeah, no, we have grass seed fields is beautiful in the spring. It's like acres and acres and acres of lawn.
Wow.
And actually, Oregon has some fantastic. We get the grass seed, we get the Christmas trees, we get the hops, we get the vineyards, and see fruit trees and nursery stock. So we've got all the fun agriculture out here.
Oh my God! You know, and we're gonna have to end the interview very shortly. But I was watching a documentary called "The History of the Universe in 2 Hours," and they were talking about how grass was something that led to the development of nations because wheat is grass. You know, in my head, I always thought lawn is grass. It never occurred to me that all these grain crops and whatnot are derivatives of grass. And I thought of you because I was like, grass seed,
I know. Dyke in the grass seed capital of the world. No, that's not true. But that's what Trina Hoffman says about herself.
I like her. I like how she developed and I wanted to see her in her black veil or something like that, you know, very goth and wonderful. I was like, I would have liked to have watched this kid. I think that your book would have made for a very interesting and powerful series, kind of like Degrassi. Like, I never watched all of them, but I found it like a very interesting TV program. I don't watch much TV these days. I read a lot. But just to pull it back a little bit, do you see yourself writing more YA, or as an author you just go with whatever stories come to you and the market that it belongs in comes in the secondary fashion?
You know, I think for now I have found my niche in lesbian romance. Little promo for the next one. My most recent lesbian romance, placed with a large mainstream, predominantly heterosexual romance imprint. And it was actually the first lesbian romance picked up by that imprint. And I love small press publishing. And I grew up like volunteering for Calyx Press in Corvallis, so my heart is there for sure. But I am proud of that accomplishment. Breaking into a heterosexual romance publishing world is big, and my agent said that lesbian romance was unprecedented in that world, that there was of course a huge heterosexual market and a little bit of male romance, which is predominantly consumed by heterosexual women. So but lesbian romance, she said, no, like nobody does that in the world of the big five presses. And I found a place in a Hachette Book Group subsidiary. So that's been exciting, and they do have a pretty amazing network in terms of publicizing the work and getting it out there and making it to the top of the algorithms. I'd like to think it's all my brilliance, but I'm sure it has a lot to do with being a Hachette Book Group imprint. So I think I think that's going to be my landing place for at least the next 2 or 3 years. I do love YA, but I don't have children, and I basically fear them. And so everything I wrote, and forgive me, was written from my own heart and my own experience. And I don't think that I have the connection with young people today to write something that is convincingly a 2015-year-old teenager. Mm-hmm. Although they are my students, but I think for now it's going to be an adult market.
I think it's rad. You know, I'm still surprised that in 2015 lesbian romance is not broken into like the big five that much. So it's kind of cool to be that kind of trailblazer. And hopefully 10 years from now, you and I will be sitting down to coffee or tea, whatever you like to drink. And I'll be like, can you believe what it's like now? Remember back in 2015, we didn't think this was possible.
Let's put it on our calendar right now, because I'm counting on that moment where I look up lesbian, on the Heroes and Heartbreakers website and find 400 hits. I'm counting the days.
Dare to dream, sister. Dare to dream.
That's right.
So thank you so much for coming on the show again. I love talking to you, and I enjoy your books immensely.
Thank you so much. This is wonderful.